Welcome to Chapter 9 for Research Methods of Exercise Science, Sports Medicine, Fitness Technology. Let me share the screen and we'll get going. All right, so other research approaches, okay? So scientists have a wide variety of research approaches that they can use. So historical inquiries using information from the past to understand attitudes and behaviors from a specific era, historical context for contemporary attitudes, behaviors. Now, we kind of did this the first day of class when I used the example of a presentation from Alan Aragon when he was refuting some of the claims from the paleo diet, right? Because again, the paleo diet is they made some anthropological assumptions as well as assumptions that have to do with nutritional behavior from an anthropological view, as well as some nutritional untruths that they used to have as well in that particular diet. So it shows that, you know, one of the attitudes or beliefs that the author of that diet had was that during the Paleolithic period, before we started doing mass farming and raising cattle and so on and so forth, nobody used to eat wheat and things and bread and all that. And what a lot of the anthropological evidence showed was that no, there were tools for milling and making and using wheat and things like that, as well as from some of the dental cavities of some of the skeletons that they found from that period all suggest that no, that's not true. Right? Again, so digging into the past can also help us understand that what people were doing, especially when you have folks like that saying, hey, you know, the Paleolithic diet is actually the diet that's meant for our bodies and so on and so forth. But what the understanding of the Paleolithic diet, when you do an anthropological assessment, it shows that what people ate was primarily dependent on where they lived, right, and what they had around them. So, you know, areas which, you know, plants grow year-round, you know, like down here in Florida, we're in tropical areas, probably people are a lot more fruit and vegetable based because they grow all the time, right? You don't have to try to hunt dangerous prey. So, you know, around here, we've got a lot of alligators and crocodiles and things like that, which are probably not, you know, the risk or reward, especially with not having advanced weaponry and things like that, would have been a lot higher risk back in that time. Now, again, you know, getting, you know, adequate protein and all that, maybe it's worth the risk to it, you know, or hunting birds and things like that. But again, when you can, you know, and I don't know what, you know, I'm not a historian on what plants were here, you know, thousands upon thousands of years, but, you know, a banana tree ain't gonna hurt you, you know, a mango tree ain't gonna hurt you. And so being able to pick fruits and things like that, and being able to eat those things has a lot more reward versus the risk, right? Where in other areas, you know, so I grew up in areas like up in the mountains where we go through all 4 seasons, and the winter is very cold. And during the winter, you're not going to find fruits and vegetables growing. You know, during the summer, we find strawberries and raspberries and things up in the mountains. But you know, you won't find those things. So if you want to eat during the winter, you better be able to hunt. You know, so being able to hunt deer and elk and moose and those type of things, you would have had to have been able to do to survive through the winters, right? And really, that's, you know, that's what we know now. But that's also, you know, what they found by uncovering historical inquiries. Okay, you know, and so we can look at that through, you know, through written documents, or we can, you know, if we're not looking that far in the past, we can also do that through storytelling you know, that folks that have lived, you know, maybe they're 100 years old and they've lived through many, many decades, and they're able to tell all the different things going on during that time. Right? So we can look at the historical data and artifacts, as well as we can talk to people that live in those times. Again, primary source would be firsthand evidence from the time under question, so photographs, medical equipment, interviews, material, culture. Again, you know, you got to be careful with interviews because people interpret things the way they interpret things. But again, what we can see historically through photographs, again, if you get enough interviews and you start to find similarities in different stories told. Secondary sources would be events in books, magazines, and journals. So again, you know, if we don't have somebody who was there firsthand, so if we're looking at things that happened over 200 years ago, so, you know, say we're looking at, you know, when America was born in the late 1770s, and we're looking at, you know, what was going on during that time, we're going to have to look at written records, right? So we're going to have to look at historical books, and journals, and things that were written at that time to try to piece together what it was like being part of the revolution and you know, creating this nation. So here's an example of a primary source. Cigar boxes from the United States in the 1800s suggest that smoking is a desirable behavior for sporty girls, right? So again, the attitudes are in the way things were viewed back then are vastly different than what we look at, what, you know, what we would call a sporty or maybe an athletic girl today, right? Is the evidence valid? So external criticism, establishing authenticity. Is the evidence actually from a specific time period? So that's a big thing. So again, the claims of what was happening in the Paleolithic time versus what the evidence shows are vastly different, right? So the claim was that here's all the foods people ate. They didn't eat nightshade, vegetables and fruits. They didn't eat any type of grains. They didn't eat, you know, all they ate was primarily meat. You know, they kind of had, it's almost, you know, like to an extent it's somewhat keto because a lot of things cut out a lot of, you know, legumes and things that in grains and stuff that have some carbohydrates. And so, it, you know, the diet almost was like a precursor, actually somewhat of a postcursor of the Atkins and precursor to the keto diet. And I don't know that that was necessarily the intention, but that's sort of what it was. And again, when you look at the actual evidence from, you know, artifacts such as wood skeletons and tools and things like that, when they analyze those things and they find, no, there were grains that were being consumed, it gives you a different picture of what was actually happening, right? Again, carbon dating. Carbon dating is a little iffy. You know, again, from my research on carbon dating, you know, there's a lot of range on the accuracy of carbon dating. You know, anything within, you know, some things I've seen will say it's accurate within a certain amount of years, up to certain hundreds of years or thousands. You know, and so again, I'm not. That's a little bit outside of my scope. But you know, from what I see, it's all over the board. So I'm a little skeptical when it comes to carbon dating until somebody can show me otherwise. That know, you know, they can really date it down to just within a few years or something like that. Internal criticism. Establishing credibility is the evidence consistent with other artifacts from that time period. So again, when you're looking at what, you know, whatever you're studying along with other things, do they seem to go together, right? So, you know, when you look at, you know, say certain time periods and people say, oh yeah, this comes from a certain time period, and you're like, all right, well, that piece of equipment involves having electricity, but you're telling me that this comes from like the 1400s, you know, and there was no electricity back then. That's a little hard to believe, right? And so again, establishing credibility that, you know, that artifact would actually be able to be used during that time, right? or that those type of things seem to be common in those times, and so on and so forth. You to check your understanding on your own time. Philosophical research, scholarly pursuit of nature and the meaning of knowledge. Three-step process of reflection. So when you want to develop a thesis, clarify the problem, and search for arguments, right? So again, it's not too different than what it's like conducting research as we've talked about earlier. But again, you have a thesis, you have a problem, and you want to search for all arguments within that, right? And it's kind of the same thing we do when we present a problem and present a research question or problem, and we come up with a hypothesis, right? It's along those same lines. So we have inductive and deductive reasoning, right? So inductive is deriving general conclusions from specific observations, right? So this would be, say I go, good, how are you? Hey. Anyways, so deriving general conclusions from specific observations. So, if a specific observation could be, living here in Florida, I go and I observe, the behaviors of alligators, right? Now, before I came down here, I thought alligators were just mindless creatures that would try to eat anything and everything that got near them because I didn't know much about them. I've been out in the Everglades, I don't know how many times in the last 6 years that I've been here. Been on some airboat rides. I've walked along canals and areas where there's gators. And one of the things that I've noticed about gators is they don't seem to be super interested in approaching me or attacking me, right? And I've come to this conclusion, not because I've been around one gator, but because I've probably seen close to 100 gators or so over the time I've been here. It's not that I've seen, a few gators 100 times or anything like that. It's, I go to different areas, and what I've observed is, whether they're floating in the water or seen lying on the land, is that I am not much interest to them, and as long as I don't approach too close, I've never had one show any type of aggression towards me, right? So my general conclusion is gators are not mindless killing machines that try to eat any person that is within, their area, right? The conclusion I've derived is, as long as I don't put myself in a dangerous situation and I leave them alone and observe them from a distance, I'm relatively safe, okay? Deductive reasoning would be deriving expected outcomes from a general theory, right? So this would be looking at general and deducing it to, because this is what typically happens, this is what I expect to happen in this case as well, okay? So again, right now, dark clouds are coming in. Typically, when we have dark clouds, comes the rain. And when we're moving this quick and this dark, I expect it's going to start raining here in just a few minutes, okay? So that's based on the fact that generally that's what happens here. Now again, it may be one of those slight times where these dark clouds come rolling in fast and maybe nothing happens, but generally that's what happens. So I specifically believe that I'm about to get rain out here in just a minute, okay? Epidemiology research, study of determinants of incidence, distribution, spread, control of disease, and health. You've heard a lot about epidemiology here with the COVID-19 coronavirus stuff, right? And so they wonder what epidemiology research is. This is Really what they're doing, we're trying to figure out where it came from. So they've narrowed it down to Wuhan, China. You know, how it came about, there's some theories that it came out of the lab, theories that somebody was eating undercooked bats. So I kind of like the undercooked bats theory. Seen a lot of funny memes that have been derived from that, so I'm going to go with that one. Again, with some of the food markets that they have in those areas, it really surprised me. But we'll go with that one. And then how does it spread, right? So again, that's a virus that has a really fast spread rate. So as people come in contact with each other, and they, you know, people cough or sneeze on stuff, and they, you know, that gets on other folks, or they touch things that they cough and sneeze on. Apparently, it travels pretty quickly. We've kind of watched how it spreads. We've watched, you know, it's very observational nature of watching what happens. So, you know, observing, you know, what populations are most vulnerable, as we've seen folks that have a lot of underlying health issues, you know, the elderly who have many health issues, and, you know, a lot of times your body is weakened with the more age that you have as well. You know, those things all play into having a much higher risk for more serious effects of the disease versus younger, healthier populations, right? And again, as more and more people get infected, and we see, you know, who's infected and has zero symptoms versus who's infected and, you know, it leads to death and everything in between, they're able to study more and more about what goes on, right? So again, there's a lot of research in epidemiology, especially with different diseases in the past, how things have moved across, you know, anything from areas that have had contaminated water, you know, and how the water sources have spread. Is if you guys read about Jon Snow, I'm not talking about Jon Snow from the Game of Thrones, but how he found cholera in the water source. That's one of the first epidemiological studies that actually took place, and you realize people coming into the hospitals that were sick with cholera, they, you know, he had worked his way to figuring out that these people all lived in a certain area. Then he went and tested the water source and realized that it was in the water, and that was the source of the problem. Okay. So again, you look at why some people are healthy and others are not. So again, you know, when he's doing that, he knows, you know, we got some people coming in the hospital from this area for other reasons or whatever else. These people that are all coming in with this specific problem all live in the same area. You know, so that's probably a good indication of that they live in the same area, that they're sharing something which is causing this issue, right? I'm going to turn this off because the water's kind of. How does the exposure to risk factors relate to health outcomes? Right. We can look at, you know, so again, in epidemiology, like when we look at things that we do, so when we're looking at obesity rates and things like that, we can look at certain areas that may not be conducive for exercise and notice that, you know, people that live in this area really have less opportunity, and so the ability to get outside and exercise is limited, either based on, say, you know, different environmental factors. You know, maybe it's just dangerous to be out and about in certain areas versus, you know, the weather. You know, maybe the weather's not conducive to that. There's not a lot of, maybe in those places there's not a lot of indoor facilities to go work out, so on and so forth. You know, and so those are things, that's an epidemiological look into those things to figure out why that occurs in some places and not others, right? It's descriptive or analytic. So descriptive methods, these are patterns and trends in relationship among individual characteristics. So sideways, age, weight, physical activity level, specific disease or health conditions. Does obesity status lead to higher rates of cancer? Again, we've seen that that is true. Data acquired through surveys or existing databases. There's no intervention involved. It's just basically looking at it to see, does A contribute to B, right? Doesn't necessarily mean A causes B. Sometimes like with the cholera incident, we realized that the water was tainted, and that was the cause of folks being sick. So that was the A causing the B. Sometimes it's the A is just a risk factor for B, right? And so is there any type of relationship, whether cause and effect or just a relationship in general, okay? And that's good to understand, because a lot of times when we look at obesity, obesity is not necessarily a cause, but it just heightens the risk factor of other issues, okay? And again, when you can use databases, we can use a large number of participants, right? So, getting hospital records and things of that nature. Predictive methods allow researchers to establish the cause and effect between determinants and outcomes. So again, a cohort, a case study, randomized clinical trials are all different ways you can do that. So again, being able to establish the cause and effect can be very important in a lot of issues, especially like when you have a polluted water source, people get very, very sick, right? We want to find what is causing very, very sick, right? Um, um, Prospective, how does current exposure lead to outcome disease in the future? Select diverse groups from population who vary in exposure to risk factors. Let me pause for 1 second. All right, sorry about pausing that. The ring came in, making a mess. I had to move something. I apologize. Let me get back to the lecture. Again, the fun part about doing these during this coronavirus is I've got to do this while I'm kicked out of my house, because there's a lot of people in my house. Makes it a little difficult to lecture in there, right? Anyways, so share my screen again. Okay, so case controls. Let's see if we can go back to cohorts. Yeah, we're on cohorts. All right, so cohorts. These are perspective. How does current exposure lead to outcome disease in the future, right? So, some of you, if you're in school, you will notice that you're in a cohort, right? So you may be with the same group of students, experiencing the same things, going through the same classes. Um, you know, it's sort of that same principle. You're looking at a group of people at this present time that have a certain disease, or they're trying a new behavior, and we're going to see how that works out, right? So select diverse groups from population who vary in exposure to risk factors. We follow those groups over a substantial period of time, periodically checking in for outcome disease. Again, you don't always maybe looking for disease. We could be doing a cohort and looking to see if we're improving. So we could have a disease population who decide that they're going to start some type of exercise program, a nutritional program, and we could follow them to see if it actually improves rather than gets worse, right? So again, that's a little less epidemiological as we're usually looking for problems in epidemiology, but you can use cohorts and other types of research that are, as well as just looking for disease, right? The probability of developing disease based on exposure to determinants is called relative risk. So again, we all have a relative risk for certain things. You have a relative risk, living in a town or city that you might get hit by a car. You have a relative risk if you get on a plane that plane could crash. There's always relative risk. And again, based on, the speed of the drivers in a certain area, the rate of incidence of certain car wrecks and so on and so forth, the type of air transportation you take, are you doing commercial versus private, and those type of things can all play into relative risk, right? Again, when we're looking at epidemiologically, we could be looking at folks that work out versus those that don't, folks that are conscientious about what they eat versus those that don't, a combination of both, that those that exercise and they make an effort to try to, within their calorie ranges, try to make sure they get a lot of nutrients, so on and so forth, may have a much lower relative risk of developing diseases versus those who eat what they want, when they want, as much as they want, and they don't partake in any type of exercise activity. Right. This is retrospective. So, given a current disease or health state, what was expected? We would have been looking at with the coronavirus. People are coming in, and we're like, okay, let's see if we can figure out where they were exposed, right? So trying to figure out where they, what's the pattern of exposure? Who were they around? How did they get it? Type of thing. So you create groups with case and without control disease state, right? So you have these groups with and without the disease state. So again, we could look at folks in certain areas where there's high levels of coronavirus versus areas with low level, where we could look at people within a certain town and say, okay, these people in this area don't have it, these people do, right? So again, at that point, what would be best is to quarantine the folks that do have it and keep them from spreading across the rest of the city. Now, by the time we realized what was happening, it started spreading across the country. We're unable to do that, right? So again, if there was a really low number of people that had a particular virus or something like that, we could keep them in keep them contained, then we could actually stop the spreading. It's a little weird how we're doing this because, with the fact that it seems to be all over, some people have it and they don't have health issues with it. There are a lot of people that have it that don't know they have it, so on and so forth. It creates a whole different problem, right? And so again, we can also calculate odds of developing a health condition based on inclusion in case or control and exposure to the risk factors. And so that's the odds ratio, right? Randomized controlled designs. These are true experimental designs. So randomly assign participants with disease state to a control or a treatment group. So again, this is, you're going to see some of this happening now, right? So as they try to maybe create a cure for this virus, you're going to see folks getting, just treatment as normal, and some folks maybe getting some experimental drugs to see if there's better outcomes with the experimental drugs versus the normal treatment that we've been providing, right? So we follow over a prescribed period of time to determine how exposure to treatment impacts disease outcomes. So again, we'll follow this, and there's going to be multiple people that get the experimental drug, and we'll see, after so many hundreds of people get the experimental drug versus the current way we're treating now, we'll see if there's a greater odds of people surviving versus those that don't get it. If there is a greater odds, hopefully it's, if it's a vast difference, you only have like a out of the people exposed that are already in the hospital in a bad state. So say you're already in the hospital, they've already admitted you, and you've got people in there treating them one way, and say once you're in the hospital, I don't know what the survival rate is, once you add like severe symptoms or whatever. But let's just say that on the experimental drug, you have a 99% survival rate versus like 50%. It's 50-50 once you get to a certain point, okay? So if we take people at that certain point that's at 50-50 and we give them the drug versus not, now we've got a 99% survival rate out of that group, then we know that that drug works. Now, again, if it seems that it's about split on both, like 50-50 either way, then it may not work. And again, you're hearing some of that now where they're like, yeah, it seems some people respond to certain things and some people don't. So again, there's no, right now there doesn't seem to be a winning horse in that battle. So it'll be interesting to see as they continue to come up with ideas of how to combat this virus, right? So again, this shows you cohort. So, people that, have any type of exposure will follow and see what happens. Case control, we're looking backwards. Treatment control, we're taking them at a certain point in time of when they've been exposed to a disease, whether they have it or not. So or their level of exposure, and we're going to then again one group gets a treatment, one group is under control, and see how that treatment works. Right? Single subject research is when there's a high degree of individual variability in performance, conditions such as cerebral palsy, autism. So again, there's so many different, when you talk about autism, probably there's a good chance in your lifetime you've probably met people that have autism. Maybe you're like, no, I've never met anybody that's had it. You may not know because again, autism's on a spectrum. So there's folks that are highly functioning. You don't actually, maybe they function so well that that you don't really notice anything that they do that's different. And then there's other folks that that their autism, maybe changes how they socially interact with people and things like that. I've been around many different folks with different varying degrees or along that spectrum with it. I've met some folks that are very high functioning, some folks that are mid-range functioning, and some folks that you would say, that are probably going to need care or somebody to look after them their whole life. And so again, it's very individual, right? And because of that, it's hard to then determine, how do you help somebody with these different varying degrees? What are things that we could do to help them out, right? And so that can play into something. Again, when we're looking at, we can look at obese individuals. How people become obese. From a physiological standpoint, we all become overweight and obese in the same methods, right? We eat more calories than we expend, and over time we continue to gain weight, right? So physiologically, that's one thing. Now, psychologically, what plays into people becoming obese is vastly individual, right? And so again, when we think from a physiological standpoint, we decrease the calories and we increase the calories out. Solved, simple, but that's not that easy. And we all know that in our particular, our particular field. So, how do we help people combat obesity? How do we help them reverse that? That's a whole different ballgame because what plays into people not exercising is different individually. Some people like to be physically active, but they just aren't. They feel like they can't find the time or something like that. Some people just honestly don't like it. Some people are binge eaters when they're going through emotional things. Some people just have trouble controlling how much they eat on a daily basis. Some people, actually do expend energy, but they just overeat beyond that. Some people don't expend any, they're very sedentary. It's so vastly different. And when you get down to asking somebody, why they have trouble with that, and so on and so forth, you're going to get a lot of different answers, right? And so again, that makes it very difficult to do in groups, because again, individual people, and then you have to use individual approaches to help them overcome that, right? So again, single or small groups of participants. Unlike case studies, researchers provide an experimental intervention or treatment. So, I tell my students all the time, when you work with somebody on losing weight, you've got to treat it like this. Basically, you're going to do an experimental intervention that is for that person, because they are an individual, and even though they may share the same with millions of other people in being obese, their journey to obesity is very individual. And so you're going to treat it as a single subject research, and how you approach helping that individual overcome that. Single baseline reversal design, establish baseline performance of a dependent measure over 5+ trials. So that's what we call. We have withdrawal design, reversal design. So withdrawal design, we do a baseline intervention, and then we test again, right? So we remove the intervention, and does the performance return back to A, right? So we see what they're doing, or see how they're performing. We give them an intervention of some sort, whether it's, like say drugs or performance enhancing substances or exercise or whatever else. Then we take it away and we see what happens, right? Reversal design is where you add the intervention, you take it away, then you add it again, and does the performance return back to B, right? So you add it, take it away, add it, and then see, so we added it, we see them go from A to B, we take it away, they go back to A. Now if we add it again, can they go back to B, right? Multiple baseline design, multiple baseline across the subject. So is the ABA design, multiple participants. They move between baseline and intervention based on the individual performance stability within the phase. Staggered times between baseline and intervention phase for each individual. All right, so again, this is showing you the design. So participant 1, participant 2, participant 3. We're looking at the strength of the dependent variable with the different sessions in which the dependent variable is collected. So here's a hypothetical multiple baseline across subject design with 3 participants. Participant 1 receives treatment after establishing baseline with 5 observations. Participant 2 receives treatment after 7 observations. Participant 3 has 9 observations. And so you can see how these different participants perform varying with these different parameters. Okay. Analysis. These have become a lot more. I feel in recent years, and good and bad about them. Let me start with the bad, because you're not doing original research, right? And so there's a certain amount of you're working on other people's work. Now I say that, and I'm not, it is what it is. Now again, if I'm doing original research and it's based on the fact, man, I need a lot of good information out there. Meta-analysis provides some really good information, because again, being that you can take a lot of different studies that have some similar parameters, or they were studying some similar things, and then you can say, okay, well, all these folks were on a keto diet, all these folks were on an intermittent fasting diet, all these folks were on a low-fat diet, in all these hundreds of studies, and we can, then take, okay, these folks did things similar, so we can put them in these categories and so on and so forth. It's like now you have this major, huge study, and you're just running them through the statistic analysis, right? And what it does is it creates a much greater effect size. And so it broadens the amount of generalizability of does this diet work better than this diet versus this? And again, usually when you see these meta-analyses, what you find out is anybody that controlled their calories saw an effect, right? It had nothing to do with the actual diet, but as long as the calories were controlled, great, it worked, right? And so again, it gives a better perspective, you know, when you do those. So that's the good and bad. You're not doing original research, but the great part is now you can look at, oh, we had 20,000 subjects based on looking at all these different, you know, research articles, and guess what? This is what was able to be seen using statistics. You know, running all of that data through statistical analysis, right? Again, you got to look at the inclusion criteria for the study. So, you know, there's got to be enough commonalities between the studies that you can actually put in that analysis. Again, you got to locate all the published research based on criteria. So again, I'm not saying it's not a lot of work. It's just you're not doing the original research, right? You know, and so again, it's going to take a lot of work. You got to look through a lot of studies to do that, right? And so not all studies you find on a certain diet may fit into your group, right? And so again, they if they don't meet the criteria, then it's not going to help, right? And then you must have an effect size calculated within the study. Code remaining studies for key methodological components influencing the effect size, and interpret components and effect size, and then you make your conclusions from there. So again, it just gives you a greater number of people that went through some similar things, you know, maybe all over the United States or all over the world that could, you know, participated in, like, say, different exercise interventions and diet interventions, and you saw what happened. Okay. So this is just showing a control treatment results from the Logan et al. 2012 showing overall effect size of A treatments versus control and B treatments. Controls and B object controls versus locomotor skills. The standardized paired differential scores are derived from results of 11 different studies in a meta-analysis, right? So again, this shows you how, you know, going from a small effect size to a larger effect size can also change what you're going to see statistically. Okay. All right, that's it, which is good because the rain is now coming in and it's sort of blowing in on my porch, and I don't want to ruin my computer. So that's it for chapter 9. I'm going to get out of this as soon as possible. You guys can hear the thunder. We'll see you again for chapter 10.